The moment Jason's name lit up my phone screen, I already knew exactly what the call would be about. It wasn't his birthday. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't even a Sunday, when families typically check in with each other. No, it was the third Tuesday of the month, right when his rent was due. "Grandma!" His voice carried that familiar, forced enthusiasm that made my heart sink. "How are you? How's Grandpa doing with his new medication?" I smiled despite myself. At 72 years old, I'd become well acquainted with the particular tone that preceded a financial request. It was the same voice my students used when asking for deadline extensions during my 40 years as a high school principal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We're both fine, Jason. Your grandfather's out fishing with Mr. Peterson from down the street. That's great. I'm so glad to hear it. There was the predictable pause, the clearing of the throat. I waited patiently, giving him the space to get to his real reason for calling. "So, Grandma, I've got this amazing opportunity." And there it was. Not, "I miss you," or "I'd love to visit soon." Just another thinly veiled request for money. This time it was for new recording equipment, essential for his breakthrough album, apparently. Last month it had been to cover rent, after he'd spent his money on concert tickets. The month before, car repairs that somehow cost exactly $1,000. As I listened to his well-rehearsed pitch, I gazed at the family photo on my mantle from just 5 years ago. Jason with his arm around his sister Megan, both beaming at our 70th birthday celebration. Back then, their visits weren't contingent on empty bank accounts. Back then, they still called me just to talk. I wasn't always cynical about my grandchildren's motives. There was a time when Jason and Megan were the center of my world, when Harold and I would drop everything to attend their school plays or soccer games, even though it meant driving 3 hours from our home in Lakeside to their suburban life in Chicago. Harold and I had built our life through decades of careful decisions. We'd saved diligently throughout our careers, me as a high school principal, him as an engineer at the local manufacturing plant. We weren't wealthy by any definition, but we were comfortable. We had purchased our lake house after retirement, fulfilling a lifelong dream of waking up to misty water views and spending peaceful evenings watching herons wade through the shallows. "Margaret," Harold would often say, shaking his head as I wrote yet another check for one of the grandkids' emergencies. "They're adults now. They need to learn financial responsibility." But I would wave him off. "They're just getting started in life. We had help when we were young, too." The truth was, watching my daughter Rebecca and her husband David raise Jason and Megan had always been complicated. Their household had more money than sense. David's architectural firm had taken off when the kids were young, and suddenly designer. Clothes and European vacations became their normal. Rebecca, never one to be outdone by her neighbors, encouraged this lifestyle despite my gentle warnings about teaching the children the value of money. "Mom," she would say with that dismissive laugh of hers, "we work hard so they don't have to struggle like we did. What's the point of success if you can't give your children the best?" The struggle she referred to was largely imaginary. Rebecca had grown up in a comfortable middle-class home with everything she needed and most of what she wanted. Harold and I had emphasized education and hard work. We'd paid for her college, but she'd worked summer jobs to cover her spending money. Somehow in her retelling, this had transformed into a hard-scrabble tale of deprivation. While Rebecca and David showered their children with material possessions, my son Michael and his wife Claire took a different approach with their children, Emma and Ben. Michael was a high school teacher, Claire a nurse at the local hospital. They lived in a modest home just a few blocks from us in Lakeside. Their household had fewer luxuries but more laughter, fewer gadgets but more conversation. Emma and Ben worked part-time jobs through high school. They applied for scholarships, studied late into the night, and still made time to visit us at least once a week. usually bringing fresh-baked cookies or simply offering to help Harold with yard work. Those visits never ended with requests for money. They came because they wanted to, not because they needed something. The first time Jason called specifically to ask for money was during his sophomore year of college. He'd maxed out his credit card and was afraid to tell his parents. "Just this once, Grandma," he'd promised, his voice shaking with what I interpreted as shame. "I messed up my budget, and I don't want Dad to find out." I transferred the money immediately, $800 to help him learn a lesson about overspending. I thought it was a one-time mistake, and I respected that he was trying to solve it without involving his parents. That's what grandparents were for, wasn't it? To be the soft landing when parents might be more stern? 2 months later, Megan called with a similarly urgent request. An unexpected car repair had left her short on rent money. "Dad would kill me if he knew I didn't keep enough in savings," she explained. Again, I transferred the funds without question. Harold raised his eyebrows, but didn't comment. These occasional requests gradually increased in both frequency and amount. What started as emergency assistance evolved into funding for spring break trips, security deposits on apartments, and even daily expenses when they'd overspent their allowances from their parents. I began to notice a pattern in their communication. The calls and texts would come in clusters when they needed something, followed by weeks or months of silence. Birthday cards arrived late, if at all. Invitations to their events came last minute, usually too late for us to rearrange our schedules. Yet when money was involved, they somehow managed to plan their requests with perfect timing. The wake-up call came on a bright October morning 3 years ago. Harold and I were celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. We'd planned a small gathering at the Hearth, the cozy coffee shop in downtown Lakeside where we'd had our first date. Michael and Claire arrived early to help set up, bringing Emma and Ben, who had both come home from college for the weekend. They decorated the private room with golden balloons and placed framed photos from our marriage across the years on each table. My eyes welled with tears at their thoughtfulness. The party was scheduled for noon. At 12:30, Rebecca and David rushed, in full of apologies about traffic and a work emergency. No mention of Jason or Megan. "They couldn't make it," Rebecca said breezily when I asked. "Jason has a gig tonight he couldn't miss, and Megan has a sorority event. They send their love." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Harold squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support he'd perfected over our 50 years together. Later that evening, as we sorted through cards and gifts, I received a text from Jason. "Happy anniversary, Grandma. Sorry I couldn't be there. About to go on stage. BTW, could you help me out with my car insurance? It's due tomorrow, and I'm a little short this month. About $300? No card, no call. Just a request for money tacked onto a text message that had clearly been an afterthought." That night, as Harold and I sat on our back porch overlooking the lake, the reality of my grandchildren's relationship with me came into sharp focus. The realization felt like a physical pain in my chest. "They only call when they need money," I said quietly, voicing the thought that had been building for months. Harold didn't disagree. He simply took my hand and said, "You've been generous to a fault, Margaret. Maybe it's time to be generous in a different way." I didn't understand what he meant then, but the next morning brought clarity in an unexpected form. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma called, her voice bright and excited. "Grandma, I got accepted into the research program I told you about, the one that will help me prepare for medical school." Before I could offer congratulations, she continued, "I know it's a long shot, but I was wondering if you might have time this weekend to help me practice my presentation skills. Professor Harmon said my research is solid, but I need to work on my public speaking. Not money, time, expertise, connection." "Of course," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. Why don't you come for lunch on Saturday? Grandpa makes a mean grilled cheese, and we can work on your presentation afterward. Really? That would be amazing. Can I bring Ben too? He's home this weekend and was just saying he misses Grandpa's stories about engineering. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, turning my phone over in my hands as an idea began to take shape. Harold's words echoed in my mind. Maybe it's time to be generous in a different way. The next time Jason called asking for money, this time for a deposit on a new apartment after being evicted from his previous one, I was prepared. Jason, I said gently, I can't send you the money this time. What? His shock was palpable through the phone. But Grandma, I'll be homeless if I don't get this deposit in by Friday. I know this is difficult, I continued, my resolve strengthening, but your grandfather and I have made a decision. We're redirecting our financial assistance toward education costs for all our grandchildren. If you'd like to go back to school, we'd be happy to help with tuition or books. But that's not fair, he protested. You know music is my thing, not college. I don't need more school. I need a place to live. I understand you're upset, I said, keeping my voice calm despite the knot forming in my stomach. Your parents can help with the apartment if they choose to. Our support is going to be focused on education from now on. After a tense silence, he muttered, I guess I'll figure it out myself then, and hung up. The call left me shaking. This wasn't how I wanted things to be with my grandson. I wanted the easy affection we'd had when he was younger, the genuine connection that didn't revolve around financial transactions. But continuing as we had been wasn't helping him, or our relationship. Harold found me on the porch later, staring at the lake. You did the right thing, he said, settling into the chair beside me. Then why does it feel so terrible? Because setting boundaries with people we love is one of the hardest things to do, but sometimes it's also the most important. The following week, Emma and Ben came over for Sunday dinner, as they often did. As we cleared the dishes, Emma mentioned her growing student loan debt despite her scholarships. Medical school is going to be even more expensive, she sighed. I'm trying to pick up extra shifts at the cafe, but with my course load, there aren't enough hours in the day. Ben nodded in agreement. The engineering program is killing me too. I'm thinking of dropping one of my research positions to work more hours at the tech repair shop. Harold caught my eye across the table, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. Your grandfather and I have been discussing something, I began carefully. We've decided to establish education funds for all our grandchildren. We'd like to help with your tuition and books. Their reactions couldn't have been more different from Jason's. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and Ben looked like he might fall out of his chair. Are you serious? Emma asked. Grandma, that would change everything. I wouldn't have to work so many hours, and I could accept that research position that doesn't pay much, but would be amazing experience for medical school applications. But it's so much money, Ben protested. Are you sure you can afford it? Harold chuckled. We've lived simply and saved carefully. Helping our grandchildren get an education is exactly what we want to do with those savings. We just have one condition, I added. This isn't a blank check. We want to be involved in your educational journey. Regular updates about classes, professors, what you're learning, and Sunday dinners whenever you're in town. That's not a condition, Emma laughed, wiping away a tear. That's a bonus. That night, I drafted 2 emails. One to Rebecca, explaining our decision to fund education, costs for all 4 grandchildren. The other to Michael with the same information. I made it clear that our financial assistance would be directed exclusively toward tuition, books, and necessary educational expenses, not apartments, car insurance, or recording equipment. Rebecca's response was swift and angry. She called. The next morning, her voice tight with indignation. Mom, What is this about? Jason says you refused to help him with his apartment deposit, but now you're throwing money at Emma and Ben for college. How is that fair? I took a deep breath before responding. The offer is the same for all 4 grandchildren, Rebecca. We're happy to help Jason if he decides to pursue education, community college, trade school, whatever direction he chooses. But we're not continuing to fund emergencies that seem to happen every month. This is about control, she accused. You've never approved of Jason's music career. This isn't about approval, I corrected gently. It's about investing in their futures in a way that encourages growth and responsibility. Well, Jason is furious, and Megan feels like you're playing favorites. I'm sorry they feel that. Wait, the door is always open if they want to talk about educational opportunities. The conversation ended coolly, and I knew it would take time for Rebecca to understand. Jason and Megan were even less receptive. Jason's communications dwindled to nearly nothing, and Megan began addressing her occasional texts to Harold rather than including me. It hurt. Every day without contact from them felt like a small rejection. Had I made a terrible mistake? Was I damaging my relationship with half my grandchildren beyond repair? But then I would get a call from Emma, excited about a complicated procedure she'd witnessed during her hospital shadowing experience, or Ben would stop by with questions about a programming problem he was trying to solve, and I knew we had made the right decision. These were real relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine interest, not financial dependence. 3 months after our decision, I received an unexpected email from Megan. The subject line read simply, "Coffee?" We met at the hearth the following day. She arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued, without her usual perfectly styled hair and carefully selected outfit. "Thanks for meeting me, Grandma," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I waited as she stirred her latte, clearly gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about education," she finally continued. "At first I was really mad. It felt like you were judging my choices." "That wasn't my intention," I said softly. "I know that now." She took a deep breath. "The thing is, I hate my major. I've never been passionate about fashion marketing. I just chose it because it seemed glamorous and Dad said it had good job prospects." This was news to me. Megan had always seemed to thrive in her program, at least from the little she shared. "What would you study if you could choose anything?" I asked. Her eyes lit up for the first time since she'd arrived. "Education. Some childhood education. I've been volunteering at a preschool for my community service credits, and Grandma, I love it. The kids are amazing, and seeing them learn new things just makes me so happy." I smiled, remembering my own journey into education. "That's wonderful, Megan. But Dad says teachers don't make any money, and with my lifestyle." She gestured vaguely at her designer purse. "Lifestyles can change," I offered. "Fulfilling work brings a different kind of richness." She nodded slowly. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. I'm thinking of changing my major. It would mean an extra year of school, maybe 2. Dad's furious about the idea. He says he's not paying for more than 4 years total." "And you're wondering if our education offer would extend to a 5th year?" I guessed. "Not just that," she said, surprising me. "I want to know if you would support me, not just financially. Dad's really pressuring me to stick with the current plan, and Mom always takes his side, and Jason thinks I'm crazy to give up connections to the fashion industry." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Of course I'll support you. If teaching is your passion, you should pursue it." For the first time in years, I saw tears in Megan's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The meeting with Megan marked a turning point. It wasn't an instant transformation. Our relationship still needed rebuilding, but it was a start. She began stopping by the lake house on weekends when she came home, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk. No requests, no emergencies, just conversation. Jason was a harder case. His communication remained sporadic and often still centered around thinly veiled hints about financial struggles. But even there, I saw small shifts. For his birthday, instead of asking for money, he invited us to one of his performances at a small venue in Chicago. Harold and I made the 3-hour drive, sitting proudly in the front row as he performed original songs I'd never heard before. That last one was new, he admitted when we met him after the show. I wrote it about growing up at the lake house. Remember how you used to take me fishing at sunrise, Grandpa? Harold's face softened with emotion. Every Saturday in summer, you were the only one patient enough to sit quietly in that boat. I miss those days, Jason said. And for a moment, I glimpsed the thoughtful boy he'd once been beneath the struggling musician exterior. As we drove home that night, Harold reached over and squeezed my hand. You were right, he said simply. About what? About being generous in a different way. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is believe someone can stand on their own 2 feet. 6 months into our new approach, all 4 grandchildren gathered at our lake house for the first time in years. The occasion was Emma's acceptance to medical school, a celebration no one wanted to miss. As I watched them interact, Emma sharing her excitement, Ben discussing his latest engineering project, Megan talking about her new education classes, and Jason actually listening instead of dominating the conversation, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. How did it go with Jason yesterday? Harold asked quietly as we prepared lunch in the kitchen. Jason had asked to speak with me privately, and we'd spent an hour walking along the lakeshore. He's enrolling in music business courses at the community. College, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. Says if he's going to make it as a musician, he needs to understand the industry better. Asked if our education offer still stands. Harold smiled. And? I told him we'd cover the tuition and books, just like we promised. Through the kitchen window, I could see all 4 grandchildren now, sitting on the dock with their feet dangling in the water. They were laughing about something, their shoulders touching, heads bent together like when they were children. It hadn't been an easy road. Setting boundaries rarely is. There had been angry calls, hurt feelings, and painful silences. But watching them now, I knew without doubt that redirecting our financial support toward education, rather than enabling dependence, had been an act of true love. Money can solve immediate problems, but it can't build character or create genuine connection. Sometimes the most valuable gift we can offer is the space for someone to find their own way, with guidance, support, and clear boundaries to light the path. They might not all become doctors or engineers or even graduate with perfect grades, but they were learning something more important than any credential could convey: self-reliance, purpose, and the knowledge that their relationships with us were about more than what we could give them financially. And that, I realized as I called them in for lunch, was the most important education of all. I thought our new education-focused approach would gradually heal the divide in our family. I hoped that with time, Jason and Megan would recognize the value of our boundaries and perhaps even appreciate them. But I was unprepared for what happened next. It was a crisp Sunday morning in early spring when Rebecca called. Her tone immediately set me on edge, that false brightness that always preceded a difficult conversation. Mom, we need to talk about the kids' trust fund, she said without preamble. Trust fund? I repeated, genuinely confused. Harold and I had set up modest education funds for each grandchild when they were born, but these were hardly what anyone would call trust funds. Don't play dumb, Mom, Rebecca said, her voice sharpening. Dad mentioned years ago that you were planning to leave each grandchild a significant inheritance. The kids are really counting on that money. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Harold and I had indeed discussed leaving portions of our estate to our grandchildren someday, but these were private conversations. We'd never made promises to anyone about specific amounts or timing. Rebecca, I said carefully, Your father and I have made provisions in our will for all 4 grandchildren. But that's for the distant future. And frankly, it's not something the kids should be counting on right now. Well, Jason needs his share now, she stated flatly. He's starting a recording studio with some friends, and they need capital. He can't get a bank loan with his credit history, and David and I aren't comfortable being the only ones investing in his future. The audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. Not just asking for money, which had become routine, but demanding an advance on an inheritance that wasn't even guaranteed. That's not how inheritance works, I finally managed. We're still very much alive and using our retirement savings to, well, fund our retirement. Mom, be reasonable, Rebecca pressed. You're living in that big lake house with more space than you need. You could easily downsize and free up some capital for the kids. It's going to be their money eventually anyway. A hot flash of indignation rose in my chest. The lake house had been our dream for decades. We'd worked and saved our entire lives to afford this peaceful retirement. And now my own daughter was suggesting we sell it to fund her son's latest business venture? The answer is no, Rebecca, I said firmly. We're not advancing any inheritance to Jason. Our offer to help with education expenses stands for all 4 grandchildren. That's all. This studio is his education, she protested. It's his career training, just in a different form than the college track you're so fixated on. If Jason presents us with a legitimate business plan for a recording studio with educational purposes, teaching music, providing internships for students, we can discuss it. But from what you've described, this sounds like a commercial venture, not education. The line went quiet for a moment before Rebecca spoke again, her voice icy. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, that's your choice. But don't be surprised if certain things come to light that you might prefer stayed private. What is that supposed to mean? I asked, alarm bells ringing in my head. Dad wasn't always the perfect husband, was he? Rebecca said, her tone deliberately casual. Jason mentioned that Grandpa once told him about some trouble in your marriage back in the 80s. Would be a shame if those old stories started circulating among the extended family. My blood ran cold. Harold and I had indeed gone through a difficult period in our marriage nearly 40 years ago, a brief separation that we'd worked through in private. It wasn't something we'd discussed with our children, though I supposed Harold might have shared something with Jason during one of their fishing trips, man-to-man talks that I'd always encouraged. Are you threatening me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course not, Mom, Rebecca said with exaggerated innocence. I'm just pointing out that family loyalty should go both ways. You've always preached about the importance of supporting each other, but now when Jason needs real help, you're hiding behind these arbitrary, education-only rules. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, my coffee growing cold before me. The conversation replayed. In my mind, each word cutting deeper with every iteration. My own daughter had just attempted to blackmail me. My grandson had taken a private confidence shared by his grandfather and weaponized it. When Harold returned from his morning fishing trip, he found me still at the table, staring blankly at the wall. Margaret, what's wrong? He asked, setting down his tackle box and rushing to my side. I told him about Rebecca's call, watching his expression shift from concern to disbelief to anger. She can't be serious, he muttered, pacing the kitchen. And Jason, sharing something so private, something I told him in confidence. I never thought he'd... He broke off, shaking his head. What exactly did you tell him? I asked quietly. Harold sank into the chair across from me. It was years ago, when he was going through that rough patch after dropping out of college. He was talking about feeling like a failure, and I wanted him to understand that everyone faces challenges. I mentioned that even his grandmother and I had our struggles, that we'd even separated briefly before realizing what we really meant to each other. I nodded slowly. You were trying to help him. I never imagined he'd repeat it, let alone use it as leverage. Harold's face had aged 10 years in the space of minutes. I'm so sorry, Margaret. I reached across the table and took his hand. This isn't your fault. It's... I couldn't even finish the sentence. How had we gotten here? How had our relationship with our daughter and grandchildren deteriorated to this point? Later that afternoon, Michael called. The concern in his voice told me he already knew something was wrong. Mom? Is everything okay? Rebecca's been posting some strange things on social media about family loyalty and conditional love. I gave him an abbreviated version of the morning's events, too emotionally exhausted to revisit every painful detail. I don't even have words, Michael said after a long pause. Do you want me to talk to her? No, I said firmly. This is between Rebecca and us. I don't want to put you in the middle. I'm already in the middle, he pointed out. We all are. This affects the whole family. He was right, of course. The ripple effects were already spreading. By evening, I'd received a text from Megan expressing her disappointment in our unfair treatment of Jason. Ben had called, confused and concerned about the cryptic posts he'd seen online. Even Emma, usually so focused on her studies, had sent a message asking if everything was all right. Harold and I spent that night sitting on our back porch, watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake, trying to decide how to proceed. We were both deeply hurt, but beneath that pain was a more troubling realization. The entitlement ran deeper than we'd recognized. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about control. We need to stand our ground, Harold said finally. If we give in to this kind of manipulation once, it will never end. I nodded, even as my heart ached at the thought of the family rift widening. But we also need to make sure Emma and Ben understand what's happening. I don't want them hearing only Rebecca's side of the story. The next morning brought a new development. An email from Jason appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "My education fund." I opened it with trepidation, half expecting more veiled threats. Instead, I found what appeared to be a business plan for Turner Sound Studios, Educational Division. The document detailed a supposedly education-focused recording studio that would offer internships to music students and workshops for underprivileged youth. It was clever, I had to admit. Jason had taken my words about educational purposes and crafted a proposal that, on its surface, aligned with our stated values. But reading between the lines, it was clear that these educational components were window dressing for what remained essentially a commercial venture. The budget breakdown was particularly revealing. Of the $75,000 startup costs, less than $5,000 was allocated to the educational programs. The bulk of the funding would go toward high-end recording equipment, studio renovations, and, most tellingly, a producer's salary for Jason himself. At the end of the email, he'd written, "As you can see, this project fully qualifies under your education funding guidelines. I'll need the first installment of $25,000 by next Friday to secure the studio space." The assumption in his tone, the lack of any request or even basic courtesy, told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed our relationship. Not as a grandson seeking support from his grandparents, but as an entitled heir claiming what he perceived as rightfully his. Harold read the proposal over my shoulder, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "He's not even trying to hide it," he muttered, "just slapping an educational label on the same recording studio idea and assuming we'll fall for it." "What do we do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We hold the line," Harold said firmly, "and we make it crystal clear that this kind of manipulation will never work." I drafted a response, carefully addressing each point in Jason's proposal. I acknowledged the educational elements as positive, but explained that the proportional investment didn't align with our funding guidelines. I offered instead to fund specific educational workshops if he developed that aspect of the business, with clear metrics and accountability. The reply came within minutes. "This is bullshit and you know it. You're just moving the goalposts because you don't approve of my career. If you won't support me now, don't expect me in your life later." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling slightly. The naked hostility, the explicit ultimatum, it was worse than I'd feared. This wasn't just about money. This was about a fundamental misunderstanding of what family relationships should be. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. It was Rebecca. "I just heard from Jason," she began without greeting. "I can't believe you're rejecting his educational proposal after explicitly saying you'd fund education." "Rebecca, did you actually read the proposal?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "Of course I did. It's innovative and thoughtful, combining his passion with legitimate educational outreach. It allocates less than 7% of the budget to educational programs," I pointed out. "The rest is for commercial studio equipment and his own salary." "So what?" she snapped. "He needs to make a living while he builds the educational side. You're just looking for excuses because you've never supported his music." "That's not true, and you know it," I said, my patience wearing thin. "We've attended his performances. We've celebrated his creativity. What we won't do is fund a business, venture disguised as education." "Fine," Rebecca huffed. "I guess we know where we stand now. David and I will help him ourselves, since his own grandparents clearly don't care about his future." "Rebecca," I began, but she'd already hung up. I set the phone down and looked at Harold, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what had happened. "They're making their choices," he said quietly. "We can't control that. We can only control how we respond." The following. Sunday was Mother's Day. I received a beautiful handmade card from Emma and Ben, along with a flowering plant for my garden. Michael and Claire invited us for brunch at their home, where Emma surprised me with a framed photo of 4 generations of women in our family: my mother, me, Rebecca, and Megan, taken years earlier when relationships were simpler. From Rebecca, there was a generic text message sent at 9 p.m. "Happy Mother's Day. No call, no card. From Jason and Megan, nothing at all." I tried to focus on the family members who were present, on the thoughtful gifts and warm conversations. But the absences loomed large in my heart. I'd always believed that nothing could truly break the bonds between a parent and child, between a grandmother and her grandchildren. Now I wasn't so sure. The weeks that followed brought more painful developments. Rebecca began posting thinly veiled criticisms on social media about toxic parents who use money to control their children. Jason shared a song he'd written called "Conditional Love," with lyrics that barely disguised their target. Megan, always quick to follow her brother's lead, began resharing their posts with her own comments about standing united against manipulation. It was a public smear campaign, designed to pressure us into compliance. The most hurtful part was seeing distant family members and old friends commenting with sympathy, clearly believing the one-sided narrative being presented. "Should we respond?" Harold asked one evening, scrolling through yet another pointed post. "Set the record straight?" I shook my head. That would just escalate things. We'd be trading accusations in public, and nobody wins in that scenario. Instead, I focused on strengthening connections with those who weren't engaging in the drama. I called Emma weekly to check on her medical school applications. I invited Ben over to help him prepare for a major presentation. I deepened my friendships in the community, volunteering more hours at the local library and joining a gardening club. Through it all, Harold was my steadfast support. "They'll either come around or they won't," he would say. "But we know we're doing the right thing." Then came the family crisis that changed everything. It was a sweltering July afternoon when Michael called, his voice tight with worry. "Mom, It's Claire. She's in the hospital. They think it might be her heart. We rushed to the regional medical center, finding Michael pacing the emergency room. Waiting area. The past hour had been a blur. Claire collapsing during her nursing shift, colleagues rushing to perform CPR, an ambulance ride with sirens blaring. The doctors are with her now, he explained, his face ashen. They're not telling me much yet. Emma arrived minutes later, still wearing scrubs from her summer internship at a different hospital. Ben followed shortly after, having driven straight from his engineering internship an hour away. We huddled together in the waiting room, a small island of fear and hope amid the bustling emergency department. I held Michael's hand while Harold kept an arm around Ben's shoulders. Emma, already displaying the clinical demeanor of a future doctor, asked precise questions whenever medical staff emerged. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Finally, a cardiologist appeared, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Wilson has suffered a moderate heart attack, he explained. We've stabilized her condition, but she'll need surgery, a triple bypass. Her coronary arteries show significant blockage. Michael swayed slightly, and I tightened my grip on his hand. When? He asked hoarsely. First thing tomorrow morning, the doctor replied. The next 24 hours are critical. We'll keep her in the ICU overnight for monitoring. After the doctor left, Michael collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. I can't lose her, he whispered. You won't, Emma said firmly, kneeling beside him. This is a standard procedure. The success rates are very high. And Mom's healthy. Otherwise, Ben added, she exercises, eats well. She has everything going for her. I stepped away to call Rebecca. Whatever tensions existed between us, she needed to know about her sister-in-law's condition. The call went to voicemail. I left a detailed message explaining the situation and asking her to call back as soon as possible. Then I sent a text with the same information, marking it as urgent. An hour passed, then 2. No response. Have you heard from your sister? I asked Michael. He shook his head. I tried calling too. Nothing. By evening, we were allowed to see Claire briefly, 10 minutes in the ICU, where she lay pale and fragile beneath a web of monitoring equipment. She managed a weak smile when she saw us, reaching for Michael's hand. Don't look so worried, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. As we stepped out of the ICU, a nurse approached Michael. Mr. Wilson, there's a call for you at the nurses' station. Someone named Jason? Michael frowned in confusion, but followed the nurse. He returned minutes later, his expression a complex mixture of relief and irritation. Rebecca and the kids are at some resort in the Bahamas, he explained. Apparently there's limited cell service. Jason got my messages and called the hospital directly. Are they coming back? Harold asked. Michael's mouth tightened. Jason said they'll send positive thoughts, but their trip is non-refundable, so I felt a cold disappointment settle in my stomach. My daughter and her children were choosing a vacation over being present during a family medical crisis. Mom, it's okay, Michael said, clearly reading my expression. We're here. That's what matters. The night was long and terrible. The hospital provided reclining chairs for family in a small waiting area near the ICU, but sleep was elusive. Every time the automatic doors swished open, we all startled awake, fearing bad news. Emma kept us grounded, explaining each update from the medical team in terms we could understand, quietly reassuring her father whenever his anxiety peaked. Ben made countless trips to the cafeteria, ensuring we all ate something and stayed hydrated. Harold organized a schedule so someone was always awake and alert if doctors came with news. Morning brought a flurry of activity as Claire was prepped for surgery. We were allowed to see her briefly before they took her to the operating room, a moment of tense smiles and whispered, I love yous that felt unbearably fragile. As they wheeled her away, Michael turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. She made me promise to call Rebecca again, he said. She doesn't want any regrets if things don't go well. I nodded and squeezed his arm. I'll try. Her too. This time, Rebecca answered on the fourth ring. Mom? What's going on? We're about to go parasailing. The casual tone, the lack of urgency after multiple emergency messages, sent a surge of anger through me, but I pushed it aside. Claire is going into heart surgery right now, I said. Triple bypass. Michael and the kids are here at Memorial Hospital. The doctors say it's serious. A pause. Oh my God, is she going to be okay? We hope so, but it's major surgery. There are always risks. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, Rebecca talking. To someone, likely David. Look, we're on day 2 of a 7-day trip, she finally said. The resort's really remote. It took us hours to get here. By the time we could get flights arranged and make it back, the surgery would be over anyway. I closed my eyes, fighting for composure. This isn't just about the surgery, Rebecca. It's about being here for your brother during a crisis. For your niece and nephew who are terrified of losing their mother. They've got you and Dad there, she countered. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure Michael even wants me there. Of course he wants you here. You're his sister. Rebecca sighed heavily. Mom, you don't understand. Jason's been really stressed about the studio situation. This vacation is the first time he's seemed happy in months. I can't just rip that away from him. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The realization was sudden and absolute. Rebecca wasn't just enabling her children's sense of entitlement. She was actively fostering it, prioritizing their momentary pleasure over family obligations that had once seemed sacred. I see, I said quietly. Well, I should get back to your brother. I'll let you know when Claire is out of surgery. The 6-hour operation was the longest day of our lives. We paced the waiting room, jumped at every announcement, and cycled between desperate hope and quiet despair. Emma stayed close to Michael, occasionally explaining medical terminology or procedures. Ben kept himself busy organizing food deliveries for the extended family members who had begun to arrive. Claire's sister from Detroit, her elderly father from Grand Rapids, cousins and close friends who'd dropped everything to be present. Harold observed it all with a thoughtful expression, occasionally catching my eye with a silent communication born of 50 years together. We didn't need words to share our pride in Emma and Ben, our concern for Michael, our disappointment in Rebecca's absence. Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in his scrubs, surgical cap in hand. The surgery went well, he announced, prompting a collective exhale from our gathered group. We bypassed all 3 blocked arteries. Her vital signs are stable, and barring any complications, I expect her to make a full recovery. The relief was overwhelming. Michael broke down in tears, Emma holding him tightly while Ben stood nearby, his own eyes wet. Around them, Claire's family and friends embraced and quietly celebrated. In the midst of this emotional scene, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Any news? I replied with the positive update, adding that her brother could really use her support during Claire's recovery, which would be long and challenging. Her response came quickly. Great news. We'll send flowers. Maybe we can visit when we get back next week if they're still in the hospital. If they're still in the hospital. As if her sister-in-law's life-threatening condition was an inconvenient scheduling conflict. I showed the message to Harold, who shook his head in disbelief. I don't recognize her anymore, he said softly. When did she become this person? I had no answer. The daughter I'd raised had been thoughtful and caring. She'd visited elderly neighbors after school, volunteered at animal shelters, written heartfelt notes to family members going through hard times. Somewhere along the way, that empathetic young woman had transformed into someone who could dismiss a family emergency as less important than a vacation. The next few days established a new rhythm. Claire was moved from intensive care to a regular room after showing steady improvement. Michael took family leave from his teaching job to remain at her side. Emma and Ben balanced hospital visits with their summer jobs and internships, bringing home-cooked meals and fresh clothes for their father. Harold and I became the support system for the entire operation, driving Ben to work when he was too exhausted to drive safely, helping Emma review medical school applications during hospital waiting room downtime, ensuring Michael took breaks to eat and rest. Through it all, Rebecca and her family remained in the Bahamas, their involvement limited to occasional text messages asking for updates. I sent brief, factual responses, no longer trying to make them understand the gravity of what they were missing. On the 5th day after surgery, as Claire was beginning short walks down the hospital corridor with assistants, I received a surprising text from Megan. "Grandma, are you at the hospital? Can I come see you?" I stared at the message in confusion. According to Rebecca, the whole family was still at the resort. "Of course," I replied. "We're in room 412. An hour later, Megan appeared in the doorway of Claire's room, looking uncertain and out of place. Her normally perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup, a startling departure from her usual carefully curated appearance. "Megan?" Michael said, clearly surprised. "I thought you were in the Bahamas." "I was," she said quietly. "I came back early." Claire, propped up in her hospital bed, smiled weakly. "It's good to see you, sweetheart." Megan approached hesitantly, bending to give her aunt a gentle hug. "I'm so sorry this happened, Aunt Claire. And I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." After a brief visit with Claire, during which Megan seemed genuinely concerned and attentive, she asked if I would come to the cafeteria with her. I followed, curious about this unexpected development. As we settled at a small table with cups of mediocre coffee, Megan stared down at her hands. "I had a huge fight with Mom and Jason," she finally said, "about not coming back for Aunt Claire's surgery." I waited, giving her space to continue. "It just felt so wrong," she went on. "Uncle Michael has always been there for us. Remember when I crashed my car senior year and he drove 3 hours to help me deal with insurance? Or when Jason got arrested for that bar fight and Uncle Michael was the one who bailed him out because Dad was away on business?" I nodded, surprised by her self-awareness. "So I told Mom we needed to go home, that Aunt Claire being in the hospital was more important than parasailing and beach parties. Jason said I was being dramatic, that Aunt Claire would be fine with or without us there. Mom said..." She hesitated, looking pained. "Mom said I was turning into a judgmental prude like you." The words stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "What happened then?" "I packed my bags and took a taxi to the airport, used my emergency credit card to book a flight home." She smiled slightly. "Guess I finally found an actual emergency to use it for." "Your mother must have been upset," I observed. Megan nodded. "She said if I left, I was choosing their side over family." I told her that's exactly what she was doing too, choosing vacation over family. She didn't like that. The maturity in Megan's assessment caught me by surprise. For years, she had followed her mother and brother's lead without question. This independent thinking was new and heartening. "I'm proud of you," I said simply. "It takes courage to stand up for what you believe is right, especially to the people closest to you." Megan looked up, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said back when you changed the education funding, about investing in futures and encouraging growth. I didn't get it then. I was just mad that you were being unfair to Jason." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "But these past few months in my education classes, working with kids who have so little but try so hard, it's changed how I see things. Some of my classmates are working 2 jobs to afford teaching degrees that will lead to careers with modest salaries. They're doing it because they believe in the value of education, not for money." I reached across the table and took her hand. That perspective is a gift, Megan. Not everyone gets it, and many who do come to it much later in life. I was so awful to you, she whispered. The way we all were. Using Grandpa's private story against you, the social media posts, the silent treatment. How can you even stand to look at me? Because you're my granddaughter, I said firmly. And because people make mistakes, learn, and grow. That's what life is. She wiped away a tear. Mom and Jason won't forgive me for leaving. They're saying I betrayed them. Give them time, I advised, though privately I wondered if Rebecca was capable of the self-reflection necessary to recognize her own role in this family fracture. In the meantime, you're always welcome at our home. Always. Megan's unexpected return marked another turning point in our family's evolving story. That evening, she joined us for dinner at Michael and Claire's house, where Emma had prepared a meal suitable for her mother's post-surgical dietary restrictions. The dynamic was initially awkward. Emma and Ben clearly wary of their cousin's sudden reappearance after months of social media hostility. But as the evening progressed, something remarkable happened. Megan actively engaged with her cousins, asking thoughtful questions about Emma's medical school plans and Ben's engineering projects. She volunteered to help with dishes without being asked. She showed Michael photos of her practicum students at the preschool, her face lighting up as she described their progress. By the time we left, the ice had noticeably thawed. Ben had offered to help Megan move into her new apartment closer to the education department. Emma had invited her to a study group for an advanced psychology course they were both taking, albeit for different degree programs. Well, Harold said as we drove home along the moonlit lake road, I certainly didn't see that coming. People can surprise you, I replied, thinking of the transformation I'd witnessed in Megan over dinner. Sometimes in good ways. Do you think Rebecca will come around too? He asked. I sighed, considering the question. I don't know. It would require her to acknowledge some painful truths about herself and the way she's raised her children. That's never easy. And Jason? Jason has always followed Rebecca's lead, I said. If she changes, there's hope for him too. But I won't hold my breath. As we turned onto our driveway, the headlights swept across our lakeside home. The dream we'd worked decades to achieve. The sanctuary that Rebecca had so casually suggested we sell to fund her son's business venture. I felt a renewed appreciation for this place and for the life Harold and I had built together. The family fracture had been painful, the confrontations ugly and hurtful. But through it all, we'd held firm to our principles. And now, unexpectedly, those same principles had begun to bear fruit in Megan's growing maturity and self-awareness. It wasn't the outcome I'd expected or even hoped for. But as Harold and I settled onto our porch swing to watch the stars reflect on the still lake waters, I realized it might be exactly what our family needed. Claire's recovery was slow, but steady. After a week in the hospital, she was discharged, with a detailed care plan, multiple medications, and strict instructions to rest. Michael converted their living room into a temporary bedroom to spare her the stairs, and our family fell into a new routine organized entirely around her healing. Emma's medical background proved invaluable. She created color-coded medication, charts taught Michael proper wound care, and knew exactly when to insist that Claire was pushing herself too hard. Ben became the household manager, handling grocery shopping, meal prep, and the endless stream of well-wishers who arrived with casseroles and concerned questions. Megan surprised us all by showing up every evening after her classes, often bringing books or magazines for Claire, or sometimes just sitting with her when everyone else was busy. There was a gentleness to her interactions with her aunt that I'd rarely seen before, a patient attentiveness that seemed to mark her growing maturity. She's going to make an excellent teacher, Claire remarked one afternoon as Megan left for her evening class. She has that quality, you know the one, where she's completely present with whoever she's talking to. I nodded, thinking how different This was from the distracted, self-absorbed young woman who had barely looked up from her phone during family gatherings just months earlier. Rebecca, Jason, and David finally returned from their vacation 10 days after Claire's surgery. Rebecca texted to say they were back, but didn't immediately visit, citing jet lag and a busy work schedule. When they finally appeared at Michael and Claire's house 3 days later, the contrast between the two branches of our family couldn't have been more stark. Rebecca swept in with a giant floral arrangement and air kisses, dressed as though for a business lunch rather than a family visit. David hung back, checking his watch repeatedly, clearly seeing this as an obligation to be completed rather than a meaningful family moment. Jason slouched in last, immediately asking for the Wi-Fi password, and then disappearing into his phone for most of the visit. "You look great," Rebecca told Claire with bright insincerity. "Almost back to normal." Claire, still pale and moving with painful slowness, managed a tight smile. "It's a long road yet, but I'm getting there." "Well, the flowers should help," Rebecca said, gesturing to the enormous arrangement that was already causing Claire's eyes to water from allergies. "They're from that exclusive florist in Chicago. Cost a fortune, but only the best for family, right?" Michael quietly removed the flowers to the porch, exchanging a look with Emma that spoke volumes. The visit lasted exactly 47 minutes. I noticed David checking the time as they prepared to leave, during which Rebecca dominated the conversation with stories from their resort vacation, barely asking about Claire's condition or recovery needs. As they were leaving, Rebecca pulled me aside in the hallway, her voice lowered to a dramatic whisper. "Mom, we need to talk about Megan. She's been completely unreasonable since she left the vacation early. Won't respond to my texts, barely. Speaks to Jason. I think you and Dad are influencing her against us." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. "Rebecca, Megan is a grown woman making her own decisions. We haven't influenced her in any way." "Then explain why she suddenly abandoned her family vacation to rush back for Aunt Claire, who was clearly fine and surrounded by plenty of help already." I studied my daughter's face, searching for any sign that she understood how callous she sounded. I found none. "Perhaps," I said carefully, "Megan felt that being present for family during a medical crisis was more important than completing a vacation." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. That judgmental tone, implying we did something wrong by not interrupting our trip for what turned out to be a completely successful surgery." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that confrontation would only deepen the rift. "We all make our own choices, Rebecca. Megan made hers, you made yours. Let's leave it at that." She gave me a long, hard look before turning away. "Fine, but this isn't over." That proved to be an understatement. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca launched what could only be described as a campaign to bring Megan back into the fold, or more accurately, back under control. It began with love bombing, expensive gifts delivered to Megan's apartment, invitations to exclusive restaurants, offers to pay for a spring break trip to Europe. When these enticements failed to change Megan's increasingly independent course, Rebecca's approach darkened. She began calling Megan's professors with concerns about her daughter's sudden interest in education over fashion marketing, suggesting she might be experiencing a mental health crisis. She contacted Megan's landlord about reports of parties at her apartment, entirely fabricated. She even tried to have Megan's car repossessed, claiming that since she and David had co-signed the loan, they had the right to reclaim the vehicle if Megan wasn't using it as intended. None of these tactics worked. If anything, they pushed Megan further away and closer to our side of the family. One evening in late August, she appeared at our door looking exhausted and upset. "Mom's lost her mind," she announced, dropping onto our sofa. "She just threatened to stop paying my tuition if I don't switch back to marketing." Harold set aside his newspaper. "Can she do that? I thought your tuition was covered by your trust from your grandfather. It is, technically, Megan sighed. But Mom and Dad are the trustees until I'm 25. They can withhold distributions if they decide I'm not using the money appropriately. I sat beside her, concern growing. What are you going to do? She straightened her shoulders, a determined look replacing her initial distress. I'm going to get a job, apply for loans and scholarships if I have to. I'm not giving up on education just because she's throwing a tantrum. Harold and I exchanged glances, silently agreeing on our next move. Megan, I said carefully, our offer to help with education expenses stands. If your parents cut off your tuition, we'll cover it. No, she said firmly, surprising us both. I appreciate the offer. Really, I do. But I need to handle this myself. It's time I stopped being financially dependent on anyone. Her independence both impressed and concerned me. At least let us help you find a suitable job, something that will work with your class schedule. After some persuasion, she agreed to let me make a few calls. By the following week, Megan had secured a position as a teacher's aide at a preschool near campus, perfect experience for her education major and flexible enough to accommodate her classes. Rebecca was furious when she learned Megan had found a way to continue her education program without their financial support. Her response was to escalate again, this time extending her campaign to include Harold and me directly. It began with small things. She stopped acknowledging us at community events, crossed to the other side of the street if she saw us downtown, told mutual friends she was taking a break from her parents due to toxic behaviors she refused to specify. Then came the legal letter. It arrived on a crisp September morning, official-looking in its law firm envelope. The contents were stunning. Rebecca and David were formally requesting an early distribution from our estate for Jason's business venture, citing a verbal promise they claimed Harold had made years earlier. The letter suggested that if we didn't comply voluntarily, they were prepared to explore legal options to compel the distribution. Harold read it 3 times, his face growing paler with each reading. I never promised. He stammered, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. I took the letter from his trembling hands. Of course you didn't. This is complete fabrication. But why would they? He couldn't even complete the question. I sat beside him, taking his hand in mine. Because they've convinced themselves they're entitled to our money. And when people believe they're entitled to something, they can justify almost any action to get it. We consulted our attorney that same day, an old friend named Robert who had handled our legal affairs for decades. He read the letter carefully, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. This is aggressive but ultimately baseless, he concluded, setting the letter aside. There's no evidence of any promise, verbal or otherwise, and even if there had been, it wouldn't be legally binding on your estate. So we can ignore it? Harold asked hopefully. Robert shook his head. I wouldn't recommend that. We should respond clearly and firmly, establishing boundaries while shutting down any notion that their claim has merit. He drafted a response that was polite but unambiguous. There had been no promise of early inheritance. We had no intention of providing such a distribution, and any further communication on this matter should be directed to him rather than to us personally. This should be the end of it, Robert assured us as we left his office. They have no legal standing, and they know it. This was likely just an intimidation tactic. But Rebecca and Jason weren't finished with their campaign. When the legal approach failed, they took their grievances public. I first became aware of the social media posts through Claire, who called one evening, her voice tight with anger. Margaret, have you seen what Jason is posting about you and Harold? I hadn't. At 72, social media wasn't a significant part of my life. He's making some pretty awful accusations, Claire continued, claiming you promised to fund his studio and then reneged, saying you've always favored Emma and Ben, even suggesting that Harold might not be mentally competent to make financial decisions. My blood ran cold at the last part. Harold had always been sharp as a tack, his engineering mind keeping him mentally agile well into his 70s. To suggest otherwise was not just hurtful. It was a deliberate attempt to undermine his dignity. "Michael's livid," Claire added. "He wanted to respond publicly, but I convinced him that would just add fuel to the fire." She was right, of course. Engaging in a public dispute would only escalate the situation and drag more family members into the conflict. Still, the knowledge that these accusations were circulating among our extended family, friends, and community was deeply painful. The next phase of their campaign was perhaps the most bizarre and hurtful. Rebecca began reaching out to my former colleagues and students from my years as a high school principal, seemingly trying to dig up any complaints or negative experiences that could be used against me. I learned of this from Eleanor Rodriguez, who had been my assistant principal for 15 years before succeeding me when I retired. "Margaret, I thought you should know," she said during our monthly lunch at the hearth. "Rebecca called me asking strange questions about your tenure. Whether there had been any parent complaints, disciplinary issues, conflicts with the school board. She framed it as research for some family history project, but it felt off." I set down my fork, appetite suddenly gone. "What did you tell her?" Eleanor gave me a firm look. "That you were the most respected principal this town has ever seen. That students still stop me in the grocery store to ask about you, years after graduating. That if she was looking for dirt on Margaret Wilson, she was wasting her time." I was grateful for Eleanor's loyalty but disturbed by Rebecca's tactics. What did she hope to gain by trying to tarnish my professional reputation? Was this simply revenge for our refusal to fund Jason's studio, or was there a deeper strategy at work? The answer came a week later when Harold and I received an invitation to mediation from a family counseling center in Chicago. The accompanying letter, written by someone who identified herself as a family reconciliation specialist, explained that Rebecca and Jason had sought professional help to heal the deep family wounds and financial abuse they were experiencing. "Your daughter and grandson are deeply hurt by what they perceive as conditional love and financial manipulation," the letter stated. "They hope that with professional guidance, your family can establish healthier patterns of communication and support." Harold stared at the letter in disbelief. "Financial abuse? We're being accused of financial abuse for not giving them money?" I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at the accusation, sadness at how distorted our family relationship had become, and a small nagging worry. What if an outsider believed their version of events? What if this counselor had already decided we were the villains in this family drama? After careful consideration, we declined the mediation invitation. Instead, we sent a brief, polite response explaining that we were open to family counseling, with a neutral third party who hadn't already been influenced by one-sided accounts. This refusal prompted the next escalation. Rebecca and Jason began showing up at public events where they knew we would be present, creating uncomfortable scenes that stopped just short of outright confrontation. At the Lakeside Autumn Festival, they positioned themselves near the community center entrance, forcing us to walk past them to attend the art exhibition featuring Harold's woodworking. Rebecca loudly told a companion, "Some people prioritize their hobbies over their families' well-being," as we passed. At a fundraiser for the local hospital where Claire worked, Jason approached donors we were speaking with and made cryptic comments about elders who hoard wealth while the younger generation struggles. The confused donors quickly made excuses to move away from the awkward interaction. Most painfully, they appeared at Emma's white coat ceremony, a significant milestone in her medical education that the entire family had gathered to celebrate. They arrived late, sat in the back, and left immediately after the ceremony without congratulating Emma. Their presence cast a shadow over what should have been an entirely joyful occasion. Through it all, Harold and I tried to maintain our dignity and focus on the positive relationships in our lives. We doubled down on supporting Emma and Ben in their educational journeys, We helped Michael and Claire as Claire continued her recovery. We welcomed Megan's increasingly frequent visits, watching with pride as she blossomed in her education program. But the constant tension took its toll, especially on Harold. He had always been the more sensitive of us, feeling family conflicts deeply despite his outward stoicism. I noticed he was sleeping poorly, occasionally forgetting small details, and spending more time alone in his workshop, losing himself in the precise measurements and smooth textures of his woodworking projects. One evening in late October, I found him sitting on the porch swing in the dark, staring out at the lake where the moonlight created a silver path across the water. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders, against the autumn chill. "It's freezing." "Just thinking," he replied, his voice distant. I sat beside him, concerned by his unusual melancholy. "About?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, "Did we fail, Margaret?" "With Rebecca, I mean. Did we do something wrong in how we raised her?" The question caught me off guard. We had asked ourselves many things during this painful family rift, but this fundamental doubt about our parenting was new. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "We raised both our children with the same values: hard work, integrity, compassion. Michael embraced those values. Rebecca made different choices." "But why?" Harold pressed. "Was it something specific we did? Did we favor Michael somehow?" I thought back through the decades of parenting, searching for any pattern of preferential treatment. If anything, we were harder on Michael. He had stricter curfews, more chores. Rebecca was always a bit more fragile, so we tended to protect her more. "Maybe that was it," Harold mused. "Maybe we protected her too much. Never let her experience real consequences." "Perhaps," I conceded. "Or maybe it's just who she is. Nature as much as nurture." Harold sighed deeply. "I keep thinking about a moment when she was about 16. She had spent all her allowance on a concert ticket, then immediately asked for more money for a new dress to wear to the concert. When I suggested she use something from her closet, she threw a tantrum, accusing me of ruining her social life. I remembered the incident. Rebecca had eventually worn a dress she already owned, but the drama surrounding the decision had been exhausting. "I gave in so many times over the years," Harold continued. "It was easier than dealing with her meltdowns. But I wonder now if, every time I caved, I was teaching her that tantrums worked, that if she pushed hard enough, she'd get her way." I took his hand, feeling its familiar warmth. We did our best with the knowledge we had then. Parenting doesn't come with a manual. "No," he agreed with a sad smile. "But if it did, I suspect one of the chapters would warn against teaching your child that money is a substitute for emotional connection." The insight struck me deeply. That was exactly what had happened with Rebecca, and by extension, with Jason and Megan. Money had become the primary language of family love in their household. Contributions were measured in dollars, not in time or attention. Problems were solved with checkbooks rather than conversation. Even now, Rebecca's idea of making amends with Megan involved expensive gifts rather than addressing the underlying issues. "Well," I said finally, "it's not too late to model a different way. Not for Megan, at least. And maybe someday for Jason. And Rebecca too, if they're willing to see it." Harold nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. The weight of the family conflict was wearing on him in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until that moment. The following week brought a new development that would test our resolve even further. Michael called one evening, his voice tense with controlled anger. "Mom, I need to give you a heads up. Rebecca's telling people in town that you and Dad are planning to write her and her kids out of your will. Mrs. Palmer at the pharmacy mentioned it to Claire today, asking if it was true and saying how sad she was about the family rift." I closed my eyes, fighting a wave of frustration. "That's completely false. We haven't changed our will in years. I know that, Michael said. But the rumors are spreading. Several of my colleagues have heard variations of the story. The thought of our private family matters becoming gossip around Lakeside made my stomach churn. We had lived in this community for decades, built a reputation based on integrity and service. Now that reputation was being deliberately damaged by my own daughter. There's more, Michael continued reluctantly. Jason showed up at Ben's dormitory yesterday, apparently drunk. He was ranting about family loyalty and how Ben and Emma are stealing what should be his inheritance. Campus security had to escort him out. Is Ben okay? I asked, alarmed. Shaken up, but fine. He's more angry than scared. Says he's never seen this side of Jason before. After hanging up, I relayed the conversation to Harold, who looked more resigned than surprised. They're escalating, he observed quietly. When intimidation didn't work, they moved to public pressure. Now they're targeting the kids directly. What do they hope to accomplish? I wondered. Surely they don't think harassing Ben will somehow convince us to fund Jason's studio? I think they're past rational strategy, Harold replied. This feels more like pure retaliation now. He was right. Rebecca and Jason's actions had crossed the line from pressure tactics to something darker. A vindictive campaign motivated more by hurt pride and thwarted entitlement than any practical goal. The next day, I called our attorney again to update. Our will, not to disinherit anyone as Rebecca was claiming, but to add specific protections. We created educational trusts for all 4 grandchildren that could only be used for tuition and related expenses, with trusted third-party trustees who would approve or deny distributions based on clear guidelines. We also added an anti-contest clause that would disinherit anyone who legally challenged the will's provisions. This won't stop the rumors, Robert warned as we finalized the documents, but it will protect your intentions for how your assets are distributed. And the grandchildren's educational opportunities, Harold added firmly. That's what matters most. As we drove home from the attorney's office, I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolution. These legal protections were necessary, but represented a profound breakdown of family trust. In an ideal world, such measures wouldn't be needed. Parents would naturally want to honor their parents' wishes. Grandchildren would respect the grandparents' right to distribute their assets as they saw fit. But we weren't living in that ideal world. We were navigating a family crisis unlike any I had imagined possible when I held my babies in my arms decades ago, dreaming of the close-knit extended family we would become. November brought a temporary lull in the conflict. Rebecca and Jason seemed to have exhausted their immediate tactics, perhaps realizing that public scenes and rumors weren't achieving their desired effect. For a few weeks, we enjoyed a strange, tense peace. No contact, but also no new provocations. I used this respite to focus on the positive relationships in our lives. Emma was thriving in her medical studies, regularly calling to share experiences from her clinical rotations. Ben had been accepted into a prestigious engineering internship for the following summer. Megan was earning stellar evaluations in her education practicum, with her supervising teacher predicting she would be a transformative educator. Even Claire's health was steadily improving. By Thanksgiving, she was able to climb the stairs to their bedroom again, though she still tired easily and required frequent rest periods. We planned a quiet Thanksgiving dinner at our lake house, just Michael's family, Megan, and ourselves. I sent Rebecca a text inviting her, David, and Jason as well, trying once more to extend an olive branch. She replied with a curt, "We have other plans," which was probably for the best. The day itself was wonderfully peaceful, filled with good food, laughter, and conversation, untainted by tension or hidden agendas. As we gathered around the table, I looked at the faces of those present, Harold at the head of the table, carving the turkey with careful precision. Michael and Claire, their hands occasionally finding each other under the table, Emma and Ben, engaged in a good-natured debate about some scientific concept. Megan, more relaxed and authentic than I'd ever seen her, offering to refill water, glasses, and help serve the sides. This was family, not perfect, not complete, but real and nurturing. Whatever happened with Rebecca and Jason, we would be okay. Then December arrived, bringing with it a development none of us had anticipated. I was volunteering at the Lakeside Library's annual holiday book fair when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Stepping outside to take the call, I heard a voice I didn't immediately recognize. "Mrs. Wilson? This is Alicia Mendez from Lakeview Community Bank. I'm calling about Jason Turner." My heart sank. What now? "Jason has listed you as a reference on a business loan application," she continued. "He's applying for financing for a recording studio venture and has indicated that you and your husband will be serving as guarantors for the loan." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Jason had not only applied for a business loan using our names without permission, but had apparently told the bank we would guarantee the loan, essentially promising that we would pay if he defaulted. "Mrs. Wilson, are you still there?" "Yes," I finally managed. "I'm sorry, but there must be a mistake. My husband and I have not agreed to guarantee any loan for Jason Turner." "Oh." There was an awkward pause. "He provided documentation showing that you had committed to financially backing his studio. He has loan papers with what appears to be your signatures." Ice ran through my veins. "That's impossible. We've never signed any such documents." After ending the call, I immediately contacted Harold, who was equally shocked and disturbed. We called our attorney, who advised us to file a police report for forgery and to contact the bank's fraud department immediately. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal consultations, signed affidavits, and grim conversations with bank officials. We learned that Jason had created elaborately falsified documents, including a letter of financial commitment supposedly from us and loan guarantee forms with forged signatures. The bank put the loan application on hold pending investigation, and our attorney sent formal cease and desist letters to both Jason and Rebecca. We also alerted our financial institutions to place fraud alerts on our accounts and credit reports. I kept hoping for some indication that Rebecca was unaware of Jason's actions, that this was his independent scheme rather than a coordinated effort. But that hope died when Michael called to tell us that Rebecca had been defending Jason on social media, claiming he had merely misunderstood our verbal commitment to finance his studio. "She knows exactly what he did," Michael said, his voice tight with anger. "She's trying to spin forgery as a simple misunderstanding." The reality we now faced was even more painful than the conflicts that had preceded it. This wasn't just entitlement or emotional manipulation. This was criminal behavior, a deliberate attempt to defraud us and potentially saddle us with enormous debt. For the first time since this ordeal began, I found myself wondering if reconciliation was even possible. How could we rebuild trust with family members who would go this far? As Christmas approached, that question weighed heavily on my heart. The holiday had always been a time of family togetherness, of setting aside differences and celebrating our connections. Now those connections felt not just strained, but broken in ways that might be irreparable. The holidays passed in a blur of legal consultations and police interviews. Instead of our traditional Christmas morning gathering with stockings and cinnamon rolls, Harold and I spent December 25th reviewing security footage with a fraud investigator who, apologetically, explained he couldn't postpone the meeting due to the severity of the case. The bank had confirmed that the signatures on the loan documents were indeed forgeries, and they were pursuing their own investigation separate from the police inquiry. Despite these grim circumstances, we tried to salvage some holiday joy. We hosted a small dinner on Christmas evening, Michael, Claire, Emma, Ben, and Megan gathering around our table for roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. We exchanged modest gifts, sang carols around the fireplace, and deliberately avoided discussing the situation with Jason and Rebecca. For a few hours, at least, we created a bubble of normalcy and warmth. "This is nice," Megan said quietly as she helped me wash dishes after dinner. "Different, but nice." I glanced at her, noting how much more at ease she seemed compared to previous holidays, when the pressure to project a perfect image had often left her tense and performative. "Different can be good," I agreed, handing her a plate to dry. She was quiet for a moment, methodically wiping the china. "Do you think they'll ever face consequences? Mom and Jason, I mean." The question caught me off guard. Megan had largely avoided discussing her mother and brother during her visits, focusing instead on her education and future plans. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "The bank might press charges for the forgery, or they might not if Jason withdraws the application. Either way, there will be consequences, just maybe not the legal kind." "It's strange," she continued, her voice thoughtful. "Growing up, Mom always talked about how important family loyalty was, how we should never air our dirty laundry in public. But she's been posting all kinds of private family business on social media, trying to make you and Grandpa look bad." "People sometimes have different rules for themselves than they do for others," I observed. "I'm starting to see that." She set down the towel and turned to face me directly. "The thing is, Grandma, I always thought Mom and Jason were right about everything. They were so confident, so sure of themselves. It never occurred to me that they could be wrong." The simple statement revealed volumes about the dynamic in Rebecca's household, a place where certainty trumped reflection, where confidence was valued over questioning. No wonder Megan had struggled to find her own voice. "Recognizing that the people we love can be wrong is part of growing up," I said gently. "It doesn't mean you stop loving them. It just means you see them more clearly." She nodded slowly. "I do still love them, but I don't want to be like them anymore." Those words stayed with me long after our guests had departed. The leftovers were packed away, and the house had settled into nighttime silence. I replayed them as Harold and I sat by the dying embers of the fire, too wired from the day's emotions to sleep just yet. "Megan said something interesting tonight," I told him, recounting the conversation. Harold considered this, absently turning, his wedding band around his finger, a habit of 50 years when he was deep in thought. "That's a profound realization for someone her age," he finally said. "Most people spend decades figuring out they don't have to become their parents." "She's changing," I agreed. "I see it every time she visits. More thoughtful, more authentic." "Education suits her," Harold remarked. "Not just the formal classes, but the whole experience of finding her own path." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again, his voice softer. "I've been thinking about something. Margaret, about our education fund policy." "What about it?" "It's working, isn't it? Not just financially, but as a principle. Emma and Ben were already on good educational tracks, but Megan, she's found something she truly cares about, something that's changing her for the better." I nodded, seeing where his thoughts were heading. "And Jason?" he continued. "I wonder if our boundary actually prevented him from taking on legitimate business debt before he was ready. That loan would have been disastrous for him. If he's not ready for a regular bank loan, he's certainly not ready to run a business." I agreed. Harold sighed, his expression a mix of sadness and resolve. "We made the right choice, even though it's been painful. That's worth remembering in the difficult days ahead." The difficult days weren't long in coming. 2 days after Christmas, we received notice that Jason had withdrawn his fraudulent loan application, claiming it had been a misunderstanding. The bank informed us they wouldn't be pressing charges since no money had changed hands, but they had flagged his name in their system for future reference. While this development spared us a potential court appearance, it didn't address the deeper breach of trust. Jason had attempted to commit fraud using our names. Rebecca had defended this action publicly. Neither had apologized or shown any remorse. Our attorney advised us to maintain comprehensive documentation of all interactions with Rebecca and Jason, since this pattern of behavior suggested they might attempt other financial maneuvers using our names. What a heartbreaking recommendation to keep records of conversations with my own daughter and grandson as if they were potential adversaries rather than beloved family. The new year arrived with a fresh blanket of snow across Lakeside, transforming our town into a winter postcard. Harold and I took long walks along the frozen lake shore, the crisp air and spectacular ice formations providing a welcome distraction from family tensions. We resumed our regular activities, Harold's woodworking classes at the community center, my literacy volunteer work at the library, our Friday night dinners with friends at the hearth. Life settled into a new rhythm, different from what we had envisioned for our retirement years, but not without joy and purpose. Emma and Ben returned to their universities after the holiday break, but called regularly with updates on their studies. Megan stopped by at least once a week, often bringing assignments for me to review or questions about classroom management based on my years as a principal. January brought unexpected news from Michael. Claire had been offered a promotion to Director of Nursing at Memorial Hospital, a position that recognized her clinical expertise while accommodating her post-surgery limitations with fewer direct patient care hours. "It's perfect timing," Michael explained during a celebratory dinner at our house. "The administrative role means less physical strain, but she'll still be using all her nursing knowledge to improve patient care." Claire looked happier and more energized than I'd seen her since the surgery. "I start training with the outgoing director next month," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's a whole new chapter for me." "Speaking of new chapters," Michael added, "we've been talking about moving." "Moving?" I echoed, surprised. They had lived in the same modest home since they were first married. "Where to?" "That's the thing," Michael said, glancing at Claire. "We're hoping to build something new. Something that would work better for Claire's recovery and eventual retirement. And we were wondering about that corner lot on your property." Harold and I exchanged looks. Our lakefront property included several acres of wooded land, including a lovely elevated corner with spectacular views that we'd always thought would make a perfect building site. "You want to build on our land?" Harold asked, his voice carefully neutral. "If you're open to it," Claire hastened to add. "We'd legally purchase the parcel from you, of course. But we love the idea of being close by as we all get older." The prospect of having Michael and Claire as neighbors was immediately appealing. As we aged, the practical benefits of family nearby were obvious. But there were complications to consider as well. "What about Rebecca?" I asked quietly. "If we sell part of our property to you, she might see it as favoritism," Michael supplied when I trailed off. "Mom, you can't make decisions based on how Rebecca might twist them. She's going to find fault no matter what you do. Besides," Claire added gently, "this would be a standard real estate transaction. We'd pay market value for the land." We agreed to think about it, though privately I was already leaning towards saying yes. The idea of having family close by, of watching a new home rise on land we loved, of creating a multi-generational presence on the lakefront. It aligned perfectly with the legacy Harold and I hoped to create. A week later, I received an unexpected call from David, Rebecca's husband. We had barely spoken since the rift began, with David generally avoiding direct involvement in the conflict. "Margaret," he began awkwardly, "I hope I'm not calling it a bad time." "Not at all," I replied, curious about this sudden contact. "How are you, David?" "Fine, fine." He cleared his throat. "Look, I wanted to talk to you about something, off the record. Rebecca doesn't know I'm calling." My curiosity deepened. "I'm listening." "It's about Jason's studio," he said. "The whole situation has gotten out of hand, and I wanted you to know I had nothing to do with that loan application business. That was all Jason's idea, and frankly, I was horrified when I found out. I wasn't sure how to respond. Was he distancing himself from the fraud attempt? Seeking absolution? Testing the waters for some kind of reconciliation? I appreciate you saying that, I finally replied. The thing is, he continued, I've been trying to get Rebecca to see reason about all this, but she's completely fixated on the idea that you and Harold promised to fund Jason's career, and then reneged. Nothing I say makes any difference. And what do you think? I asked. There was a long pause before he answered. I think Jason needs to grow up and stop expecting everyone to finance his lifestyle. I think Rebecca needs to stop enabling him. Another pause. And I think I may have contributed to the problem by giving them both everything they wanted for too many years. The admission surprised me. David had always seemed content to play the role of provider, showing his love through financial generosity rather than emotional engagement. That's insightful, I said cautiously. Yeah, well, he sounded tired. 2 decades of marriage counseling had to pay off eventually. You and Rebecca are in counseling? This was news to me. On and off for years, he confirmed. More off than on lately. I don't know if our marriage is going to survive this, Margaret. She's become someone I barely recognize, obsessed with this conflict, spending money we don't have on lawyers and private investigators. Private investigators? I repeated, alarmed. To look into your finances, he admitted. She's convinced you and Harold are hiding assets, maybe in offshore accounts or something. It's crazy. I've tried to tell her that's not who you are, but she won't listen. My mind reeled at this revelation. The situation was even worse than we'd realized. Rebecca wasn't just angry or entitled. She had become fixated to the point of hiring professionals to investigate us. David, why are you telling me this? I asked directly. Because someone needs to stop this before it destroys everyone involved, he said, his voice suddenly fierce. I've tried reasoning with her. I've tried putting my foot down about the money. Nothing works. I thought maybe if you knew how far this has gone, you might. I don't know. Reach out to her? Try to find some compromise? I felt a flash of indignation. We've tried reaching out. We've invited her to family gatherings. We've kept the door open. She's chosen to escalate rather than reconcile at every turn. I know, he said quickly. I'm not blaming you. I just don't know what else to do. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, turning the conversation over in my mind. David's call had provided valuable information, but also raised disturbing questions. How far would Rebecca go in this crusade? What would happen when her private investigators inevitably found no hidden assets, no secret accounts? Would she accept reality then, or simply find new targets for her suspicions? I shared the conversation with Harold that evening, watching his face grow increasingly troubled as I related David's revelations. Private investigators, he muttered, shaking his head. As if we've been sitting on some secret fortune all these years, while driving modest cars and working well past traditional retirement age. It speaks to how distorted her perception has become, I agreed. She's created a narrative where we're not just disappointing parents, but actively deceitful ones. Harold ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 76 years. I'm tired, Margaret. Tired of being villainized by my own daughter. Tired of walking on eggshells in our own community. Tired of wondering what new accusation or scheme is coming next. The weariness in his voice alarmed me. Harold had always been my rock, the steady presence I leaned on through life's challenges. To hear him sound so defeated was unlike him, and deeply concerning. Maybe we should get away for a while, I suggested impulsively. Take that trip to the Grand Canyon we've been talking about for years. Give ourselves some space from all this. He looked up, a spark of interest lighting his eyes. You're serious? Absolutely. We're both in good health. We've saved for travel. Why not now, when we could use a change of scenery? The idea gained momentum as we discussed it. A 3-week road trip through the Southwest, visiting national parks we'd always wanted to see. We could leave after Harold's current woodworking. Class finished in mid-February, returning in early March when Michigan's winter would be showing the first tentative signs of retreat. "Let's do it," Harold said decisively, more animation in his voice than I'd heard in weeks. "Let's book the hotels tonight." Planning the trip gave us a positive focus, something to look forward to amid the ongoing family tension. We pored over maps, researched hiking trails appropriate for our age and fitness levels, and ordered new camera equipment to document our adventure. When we shared our plans with Michael and Claire, they were enthusiastically supportive. "It's about time you two did something for yourselves," Claire declared. "We'll keep an eye on the house while you're gone." Emma and Ben sent recommendations for must-see spots in Arizona, where they had traveled for a robotics competition during high school. Megan offered to water my houseplants and collect our mail. The trip preparations created a pleasant buzz of anticipation that carried us through January's coldest days. I found myself smiling more, sleeping better, feeling more hopeful about the future. Harold, too, seemed rejuvenated, spending hours in his workshop crafting small wooden keepsake boxes for each grandchild, even Jason, though we weren't sure when or if we'd have an opportunity to give it to him. February brought another surprising development. Megan arrived for her usual Saturday visit carrying an official-looking envelope and wearing an expression that mixed excitement and nervousness. "I got it," she announced as soon as she stepped through the door. "The teaching fellowship I applied for. They're only offering it to 10 students in the state, and I made the cut." "Megan, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "Tell us everything." Over coffee at the kitchen table, she explained the details: a prestigious program that would fund her final year of undergraduate education, plus her teaching credential in exchange for a commitment to teach in high need schools for at least 3 years after graduation. "It covers tuition, books, even a living stipend," she said, her eyes shining. "And it includes mentorship from master teachers throughout the credential program. It's exactly what I was hoping for." "We're so proud of you," Harold said warmly. "This is a tremendous achievement." She ducked her head, still uncomfortable with direct praise. "There's something else," she added, her voice quieter. I told Mom about it. My heart skipped a beat. "And?" She said I was throwing my life away. Megan's voice remained steady, though I could see the hurt beneath her composed exterior. She said teaching is a dead-end career for people without ambition, and that I'd regret committing to those 3 years in some ghetto school, as she put it. Harold's expression darkened, but Megan continued before he could speak. "But here's the thing," she said, straightening her shoulders. 5 years ago, that would have devastated me. I would have turned down the fellowship just to avoid her disappointment. Now? I felt sad for her, but her opinion didn't shake my decision at all. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, deeply moved by the quiet strength in her voice. "That's real independence, Megan. Not financial, but emotional." "I know," she agreed. "And it feels amazing. Scary, but amazing." We celebrated her news with a spontaneous dinner out at the Blue Moon Diner, where the owner, Mrs. Patel, insisted on bringing Megan a complimentary slice of apple pie for our future teacher. News traveled fast in a small town like Lakeside, and Megan's fellowship was already being recognized as the impressive accomplishment it was. As we drove home, Megan in the back seat of our car since she had walked over earlier, she asked hesitantly, "Do you think Mom will ever come around? About my teaching career, I mean." I exchanged a glance with Harold before answering carefully. "I hope so. Sometimes people need time to adjust when their expectations aren't met. Your mother had a very specific vision of your future, and it's hard for her to let that go." "But it's my future, not hers," Megan said, a note of frustration entering her voice. "Exactly," Harold agreed, And you're claiming it beautifully. The conversation reminded me of something I'd observed throughout this family conflict, how differently Rebecca and I viewed our relationships with our adult children. I saw my role as supporting Michael and Rebecca in building their own lives, making their own choices. Rebecca seemed to view Jason and Megan as extensions of herself, their achievements or failures direct reflections on her own worth and status. No wonder she had reacted so strongly when Megan began charting an independent course. It wasn't just about the career choice. It was about Megan's growing autonomy, her willingness to make decisions her mother disagreed with. In Rebecca's eyes, this wasn't independence. It was betrayal. The insight didn't excuse Rebecca's behavior, but it helped me understand it, and to recognize that true reconciliation would require much more than resolving the immediate conflicts over money and education. It would require a fundamental shift in how she viewed her relationship with her children. Our road trip plans continued to take shape. We confirmed reservations at small lodges and historic hotels along our route, studied trail maps, and purchased new hiking boots that we diligently broke in with walks around the frozen lake. Harold spent hours servicing our car, ensuring it was in perfect condition for the long journey. A week before our scheduled departure, Megan called with unexpected news. "Jason's in the hospital," she said without preamble. "Alcohol poisoning." They had to pump his stomach. I sat down heavily. "Is he going to be all right?" "They think so," she replied. "He was at some industry party trying to network with music producers. Apparently, he got really drunk and passed out in the bathroom. His friends called an ambulance." "Does your mother know?" "Yes, she and Dad are with him now. She's not handling it well, blaming everyone but Jason, the venue for serving. Too much alcohol, his friends for not watching him closely enough, the hospital for not treating him like a VIP." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene all too clearly. "And you? How are you doing with this?" Megan sighed deeply. "I'm worried about him. He's been spiraling for months, drinking too much, missing appointments, burning through money. But every time I try to talk to him about it, he either brushes me off or turns it into a rant about how you and Grandpa have ruined his life by not funding his studio." The unfairness of the accusation still stung, but I pushed past it to focus on the immediate concern. "Is there anything we can do?" "I don't think so," she said sadly. "Mom would probably see any outreach from you as interference. I just thought you should know." After hanging up, I shared the news with Harold, who received it with a troubled frown. "Poor kid," he murmured. "He's been heading for a crash for a long time." "Do you think we should cancel our trip?" I asked. "With Jason in crisis." Harold shook his head firmly. "We can't put our lives on hold waiting for reconciliation. That may never come. Rebecca has made it clear she doesn't want our involvement. The best thing we can do is continue living well and keep the door open for when, if, they're ready to walk through it." He was right, of course, though it felt strange to be preparing for a vacation while a family member was in crisis. But boundaries worked both ways. We had to respect that Rebecca and Jason had chosen to exclude us from their lives, even in difficult moments. The day before our departure, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is David. Jason's being released tomorrow. Going to stay with us for a while. Thought you should know." I appreciated the update but wasn't sure how to respond. Would David welcome further questions, or was he simply keeping us informed as a courtesy? After some deliberation, I sent back a simple, "Thank you for letting us know," wishing him a good recovery. David's response came quickly. "Margaret, I know this isn't my place, but I think Jason needs help beyond what Rebecca and I can provide. If you have any suggestions for treatment programs, I'd appreciate it. Not that I can guarantee she'll listen." I was touched by his reaching out, especially knowing the risk he was taking if Rebecca discovered this communication. "I'll send some information," I promised. "And David, thank you for looking out for him." Harold and I spent that evening researching residential treatment programs for young adults with substance abuse issues, focusing on facilities that incorporated creative arts therapy that might appeal to Jason's musical interests. I compiled a list of options, along with brief notes about their approaches and success rates, and emailed it to David. His reply was simple: "Thank you. Safe travels." The exchange left me with mixed emotions as we completed our final packing. On one hand, it was heartening that David recognized Jason needed professional help and was willing to reach across the family divide to seek resources. On the other hand, the reality remained that Rebecca was the driving force in their household, and if she opposed treatment, it was unlikely to happen. Still, a small seed had been planted. Perhaps this health crisis would serve as a wake-up call for both Jason and Rebecca, opening their eyes to the unsustainability of their current path. The morning of our departure dawned clear and cold, the sunrise painting the frozen lake in shades of pink and gold. We loaded our suitcases and travel supplies into the car, double-checked that all appliances were turned off, and set the thermostat to its vacation setting. Michael and Claire stopped by to pick up our spare key and review the house-watching instructions one last time. Emma had sent a care package of road trip snacks and audiobooks that waited on the passenger seat. Ben had prepared a custom playlist of music for different segments of our journey, labeled by terrain: mountain driving, desert sunset, canyon echoes. As we prepared to pull out of the driveway, I noticed Harold looking back at our lake house with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Second thoughts?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "Not about the trip. Just thinking about how many chapters of our lives have unfolded in that house. The good and the difficult." I followed, his gaze to the home we had lovingly maintained for decades. "There are more chapters to come," I reminded him. "Some we can anticipate, others that will surprise us." He smiled then, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "As long as we're writing them together." With that, we began our journey westward, leaving behind the frozen lake and the tangled family situation, if only temporarily. As the familiar landscape of Lakeside receded in the rear-view mirror, I felt a curious lightening of spirit, not because we were escaping our problems, but because we were affirming that life contained possibilities beyond them. 3 days into our trip, as we crossed the plains of Nebraska under an impossibly vast sky, I realized something important. This journey wasn't just a vacation. It was an act of reclamation. For too long, we had allowed Rebecca and Jason's demands and accusations to dominate our thoughts, to shrink our world to the dimensions of conflict. Out here, with new vistas unfolding before us each day, that conflict resumed its proper proportion, one difficult aspect of our lives, but not the defining one. We were still Margaret and Harold Wilson. We still had dreams to pursue, beauty to witness, joy to experience. By the time we reached the red rock country of Utah, I felt a profound shift in perspective. Whatever happened with Rebecca and Jason, whether reconciliation eventually came or the estrangement proved permanent, we would continue living with purpose and meaning. We would nurture the positive relationships in our lives, contribute to our community, and find wonder in the world around us. This wasn't giving up on our daughter and grandson. It was simply recognizing that we couldn't allow their choices to diminish our lives. The path forward might not be the one we had envisioned, but it could still be rich with meaning and connection. As Harold and I stood at the rim of Bryce Canyon, watching the morning light transform the hoodoos from shadowy sentinels to glowing spires, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. We were exactly where we needed to be, doing exactly what we needed to do. Building a life well lived was, perhaps, the most powerful response to those who would diminish us. And in that building, we were creating not just memories for ourselves, but a legacy for all our grandchildren, a demonstration of resilience, integrity, and the capacity to find joy even amid life's most difficult challenges. Our return to Lakeside coincided with the first tentative signs of spring. Patches of exposed ground where snowdrifts had begun to recede, a subtle softening in the air that promised warmer days ahead. The 3 weeks away had restored us in ways I hadn't anticipated. Beyond the breathtaking landscapes and new experiences, the journey had given us perspective, a reminder that our world extended far beyond family conflict. We arrived home to find our lake house in perfect order, with fresh flowers on the kitchen table and a welcome-home lasagna in the refrigerator, courtesy of Claire. Michael had collected our mail in neat stacks on Harold's desk, and Emma had sent a care package of her homemade granola and herbal tea to ease our transition back to everyday life. That evening, as we unpacked and settled in, Megan called to welcome us home. "How's Jason?" I asked after we'd exchanged travel stories. "Better, I think," she replied cautiously. "He's still staying with Mom and Dad, but he's been attending some group therapy sessions at the community health center. David's been taking him." This was unexpected good news. "Your father convinced him to go?" "Actually, it was more complicated than that," Megan explained. "After Jason got out of the hospital, he had some kind of meltdown, smashed a bunch of stuff in his old bedroom, said some really awful things to Mom. Dad finally put his foot down and said either Jason gets help or he can't stay with them." I tried to imagine David standing up to both Rebecca and Jason. It couldn't have been easy. "How did your mother take that?" "Not well at first," Megan admitted. "She was furious with Dad, said he was abandoning Jason when he needed support. But when Jason started improving after a few sessions, she backed off a little." We continued catching up, with Megan sharing updates about her teaching fellowship and spring break plans. As we were about to hang up, she added, "Oh, I should mention, Mom knows you're back. She drove by the house earlier and saw your car." I wasn't surprised that Rebecca was monitoring our movements, but the explicit acknowledgement was unsettling. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "We'll be prepared if she decides to make contact." The following morning brought sunshine warm enough to melt the remaining snow on our deck. Harold and I took our coffee outside for the first time that year, basking in the spring light while planning our garden for the coming season. "I think we should expand the vegetable plot this year," Harold suggested. "Add more tomato varieties and maybe try those purple carrots Emma's always talking about." I smiled, enjoying his enthusiasm. Our road trip had reinvigorated him, washing away much of the weariness that had settled over him during the long months of family conflict. Our peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of tires on our gravel driveway. We looked up to see a familiar SUV approaching, Rebecca's silver Lexus, moving slowly toward the house. Harold and I exchanged glances, silently preparing for whatever might come next. Given our history with Rebecca over the past year, possibilities ranged from another confrontation to perhaps, however unlikely, a peace offering. The vehicle stopped, and Rebecca emerged alone. She stood beside her car for a moment, seemingly gathering her thoughts, before walking toward the deck where we sat. As she drew closer, I noticed changes in her appearance. She looked thinner, with dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by makeup, her usually perfect hair showing signs of neglect. "Mom, Dad," she said by way of greeting, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Can we talk?" Harold gestured to an empty chair. "Of course. Would you like some coffee?" She nodded, and I went inside to pour her a cup, giving myself a moment to steady my nerves. When I returned, Rebecca was sitting stiffly at the edge of her chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand you've been away," she said as I set the coffee before her. "Megan mentioned you took a trip west." "We did," Harold confirmed. "The Grand Canyon, Bryce, Zion. Places we've always wanted to see." Rebecca nodded, her gaze fixed on the steaming cup rather than our faces. "That's good. I'm glad you had that opportunity." An awkward silence descended, broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of a boat on the lake. Finally, Rebecca drew a deep breath, I owe you an apology, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. My behavior over the past year has been inexcusable. I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to interrupt what appeared to be a genuine, if painful, effort at reconciliation. The things I said, the accusations, the social media posts. She shook her head. I was so convinced I was right, that you were being unfair to Jason. I couldn't see past my own anger. What changed? Harold asked gently. Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. Jason's hospitalization was a wake-up call, and then his meltdown. Afterward, some of the things he said to me. She trailed off, visibly struggling. Let's just say it forced me to reevaluate some assumptions. I waited, sensing there was more she needed to express. David and I have been in intensive couples counseling, she continued after a moment. It's been illuminating, especially about how my parenting choices have affected Jason and Megan. She took a small sip of coffee before meeting our eyes directly for the first time. The forgery was my idea, not the execution. Jason did that on his own. But I was the one who suggested there must be a way to access the money I was convinced you were withholding. The admission hung in the air between us, its implications rippling outward. Not just an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but a confession of criminal intent. Why are you telling us this now? I asked. Because I need to be honest if there's any hope of repairing our relationship, she replied. And because I'm trying to model accountability for Jason. How can I expect him to take responsibility for his actions if I won't take responsibility for mine? It was perhaps the most mature statement I'd ever heard from my daughter, and it kindled a cautious hope within me. I don't expect forgiveness right away, Rebecca continued. What we did, violated your trust in fundamental ways. I just want you to know that I recognize that now, and I'm sorry. Harold reached for my hand, a silent question in the gesture. I nodded slightly, acknowledging his unspoken thought. This appeared to be a genuine olive branch, however belated. Thank you for that, Harold said. It means a great deal to hear. Rebecca visibly relaxed at his measured response. There's something else I should tell you. Jason has entered a residential treatment program for substance abuse and mental health issues. He'll be there for at least 90 days. That's a positive step, I said carefully. Is he open to the treatment? Now he is, she admitted. Initially he fought it, blamed everyone else for his problems. Me, David, his friends, you both, the music industry. But after the meltdown, I think he finally saw where his path was leading. And you? Harold asked. How are you handling all this? Rebecca's smile was tinged with sadness. One day at a time, as they say in Jason's program. I'm learning a lot about enabling behavior, about how my need to be the perfect mother with the perfect children led to some very imperfect decisions. She hesitated before adding, I've also been talking with Megan more. Really listening. Maybe, for the first time. She's impressive. The way she's found her own path despite my disapproval. She is impressive, I agreed, feeling a swell of pride. She's grown tremendously this past year. Rebecca nodded, her expression wistful. I'd like to rebuild my relationship with her. And with both of you, if you're willing. We've always wanted that, Harold assured her. The door has remained open. I know, Rebecca acknowledged. Even when I was at my worst, spreading rumors and making accusations, you never retaliated in kind. That meant something, even if I couldn't admit it at the time. We talked for another hour, carefully navigating the fragile beginnings of reconciliation. Rebecca shared more about Jason's treatment program, her counseling with David, and her tentative steps toward rebuilding trust with Megan. We listened, asked thoughtful questions, and offered cautious encouragement. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca paused on the steps of our deck, I should tell you, I've withdrawn all the complaints and inquiries I filed, the private investigators, the legal explorations about your estate, all of it. And I'm working on making public apologies to counteract the rumors I spread. We appreciate that, I said sincerely. She nodded, looking suddenly vulnerable. Would it be okay if I called you? Maybe once a week, just to talk? We'd like that very much, Harold replied. We watched as she drove away, neither of us speaking, until the sound of her car had faded completely. Well, Harold said finally, that was unexpected. Yes, I agreed, and yet not entirely surprising. Rebecca has always been capable of growth, even if she resists it for a long time. Do you think it will last? He asked, the question reflecting our shared wariness after months of conflict. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I'm willing to find out. Over the following weeks, Rebecca kept her word. She called regularly, each conversation a careful dance of rebuilding trust. She joined us for Sunday dinner at Michael and Claire's home, visibly working to repair relationships with her brother's family as well. When Emma came home for a weekend visit, Rebecca made a special effort to engage with her, asking thoughtful questions about medical school and expressing genuine interest in her studies. Progress with Jason was slower and more complicated. From his treatment facility, he sent a brief, handwritten note, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement of the pain his actions had caused. It was a small step, but a meaningful one given where he'd been just months earlier. As April brought fuller signs of spring to Lakeside, Harold and I finalized arrangements to sell the corner lot of our property to Michael and Claire. The transaction was straightforward and transparent, with Rebecca kept fully informed throughout the process. To our relief, she expressed support for the plan, even offering design suggestions based on Claire's post-surgery needs. Megan continued to flourish in her education program, her confidence growing as she accumulated classroom experience and positive evaluations. She spoke often of her younger students, eyes lighting up as she described their progress and personalities. Teaching clearly fed something essential in her spirit, and watching her passion develop was deeply satisfying. By early May, when construction began on Michael and Claire's new home, our family had reached a tentative new equilibrium. The fractures hadn't fully healed, perhaps they never would completely, but the active conflict had subsided, replaced by cautious rebuilding. One sunny afternoon, as Harold and I walked the property line with the construction supervisor, discussing drainage concerns for the new foundation, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. We had weathered a storm that threatened to tear our family apart. We had stood firm in our values while keeping our hearts open to reconciliation. We had discovered strengths we didn't know we possessed, both individually and as a couple. Most importantly, we had reaffirmed what truly mattered. Not money or status or control, but authentic connection based on mutual respect and genuine care. The grandchildren who had once called only when they needed money were gradually becoming adults, capable of deeper relationships. Emma and Ben continued their steady paths of purpose and integrity. Megan had found her vocation and her voice. Even Jason, from within the structured environment of his treatment program, was showing signs of greater self-awareness and responsibility. As I watched the excavator break ground for Michael and Claire's new home, I felt a deep sense of rightness. This was the legacy Harold and I had always hoped to create. Not just financial support for our grandchildren's education, but living examples of resilience, growth, and principled generosity. Money alone couldn't buy the kind of growth our family had experienced through this challenging chapter. Sometimes the most valuable gift we can offer is the space to make mistakes, learn from them, and build something stronger from the lessons. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.